Hello everyone. Welcome to School After Hours podcast, where we talk about all things related to out of school time programming and education. I am your host, Jay Lee, and today is going to be our special edition because we are here, as you see, at Boost Conference in Palm Springs. So for our wonderful audience, thank you for being here with us. If you give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you. You all look wonderful. Thank you for participating, and thank you for being here. But thank you for most of all showing up and showing out. I greatly appreciate it. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. I have two amazing guests with me today. So we are going to go ahead and introduce them and give them a little spotlight so they can go ahead and introduce themselves and give us a little bit of background. So go ahead and start with Ms. Alexis.
Hello, thanks, Julie, for having us today. My name is Alexis Steines. I am with the Afterschool Alliance. We are a national advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C., working with about 26,000 after-school programs across the country to provide resources, information to help you advocate for your after-school programs and to make sure that after-school stays funded and supported and part of the national conversation on education in America. And it's great to be here.
Thank you for being here.
Great, and my name is Ben Trentelman. I'm the Executive Director with the Utah Afterschool Network. We're a statewide support for after-school programs all over Utah, where we provide them with technical assistance and coaching. We hold our statewide conferences, and we're a statewide advocacy organization and NAA affiliate as well. So very excited to be here.
Awesome. So for our show, we usually start with our Community Corner. For those of you that may not know, our Community Corner is basically a segment of the show where our guests can share a little bit of information about out-of-school time programming, where it may be something that's innovative that's happening, a tip on a particular topic, or all things in between. It's basically general information that we feel people should know within the community. So our Community Corner question for you all today, if you're ready, is... can you tell us what standards you all believe a program should have in order to be considered a high-quality program? Whoever wants to start.
Absolutely. I'm happy to jump into it. So basically, before serving as the executive director at UAN, I was the director of operations, where I oversaw all of our continuous quality improvement efforts for the whole state of Utah and worked with both state agencies that fund after-school programs there. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about quality. And basically, there are a few key areas that we're always looking for, as far as safety being the first one. If we think of like a hierarchy of needs, that's your foundation of your house, where you make sure that the program is safe, the kids feel safe, the staff feels safe, it's an overall safe environment, and then you can start building up from there. So we also look at the infrastructure that's in place for positive relationships, how the staff are interacting with one another, how the kids are interacting with one another, how the program is interacting within the community that they're serving. We look at the learning environment, how conducive it is to kids' learning skills, trying new things, what type of learning atmosphere there is for the staff that are in the program, that there's an overall culture of continuous learning for the staff there as well and their professional development. And then lastly, we look at how the program is administered. And these are like really big buckets. There are all kinds of things that involve quality that are encompassed in all of these things. And so a few good areas to look at as far as trying to determine overall quality in a program are like the National Afterschool Association has their core competencies and knowledge, which is really great because they break down specific best practices that support high quality programming. We utilize the Weikert Center's school age and youth program quality assessment tools to do observations in programs, and that looks at 4 areas that are very similar to what I outlined for programs as well. And then almost every state has their own quality indicators as well. So in Utah, we have the quality self-assessment tool that breaks out all those 4 areas that I listed out for you, as well as one that's about continuous quality improvement to make sure a program has the infrastructure in place to support quality development and everything there. So that's
the rundown.
A rundown of quality practices and programs.
You got it. Check. Hit all the boxes.
Yeah, I don't know that I actually would have much more to add to that. Ben, I think, described it
really
well.
How do I follow
up with that? But, I mean, a couple of other things that we like to try and keep an eye out for are also things like, is the after-school program providing children with unique and exciting learning opportunities? Is it making sure that it's not replicating what's going on in the school day and being exactly like school, but providing additional opportunities for enrichment or learning where youth can dive into what their interests are, as well as, making sure that there's a variety of things that youth can participate in. That's not just explicitly a tutoring program, and that's the only thing students go to, or it's just homework help, but rather they can participate in something that's arts related or robotics or STEM or whatever they might be interested in. And then the other thing is, are youth offered a choice, and are they allowed to express their voices and be able to have a say and a stake in the program as well? Because they are the consumers of that program. Do they have the ability to be able to add their own thoughts and ideas?
Awesome. So let's go ahead and dive directly into our interview. So for us, there are a couple of things that I want us to touch on within this conversation. So one of them being highlighting the innovative things that's happening out of school time programming, being that we are coming out of the pandemic, but also everyone's needs are different, right? So being in DC or being based out of DC, you have a little bit more of a broader scope of our nation's out of school time programs and what they may need. But also you being in Utah as well, like from a rural area, you may be able to focus down a little bit more on those students in those environments. So for the time being, can you give us a little bit of your demographics that you serve from the Utah standpoint?
Absolutely. So we've got a mix. Utah is a largely rural state. It's similar to California in that it's a big, expansive state, and we've got a mix of both urban and rural programs. We've got an urban core that kind of surrounds our mountain range, which is where we have the most densely populated areas. That's where we see the greatest number of programs. And then we've got rural programs all in the outskirts of all those areas. And so we have slightly different demographics for each of those and the youth that we're serving in those areas. In our urban areas, we have more of a mix of more diverse populations that are there. We have a number of programs that are school-based that are serving kids in Title I schools. We tend to see a larger number of minority students in those communities from lower to middle income ranges that are being served the most in those programs. And then in our urban programs, in our rural programs, it's a little less diverse. There are fewer students that are being served in those programs overall, where we might have in a small town called Beaver, there's like one program that serves 12 kids in that community, and that's the program that serves that community. Everyone knows that program, everyone is familiar with it, but it's smaller. We also have a number of programs that operate on like reservation land down in the southeast region of the state, and those are youth that might be taking a bus 2 hours to get from their house to their school, and their after school program happens on the bus from the school to their house while they're on that ride and everything too. So we've got a little bit of everything in Utah.
That is a lot of dedication. Let me start there for a 2-hour ride.
Yeah.
Give those kids anything that they want.
Seriously, yeah, absolutely.
And
talking about demographics. Oh, and Alex, do you have anything to add from a national standpoint?
No, not from a national standpoint.
Okay.
I mean, our organization does try to serve all children and youth. Our primary focus is on advocacy for 21st century programs, but we work rural, suburban, urban, all over the country.
All of it.
Everything. Every quarter and every corner of the universe in the world. Well, in the U.S. anyway.
Yes, in the U.S.
So it then brings me to the question of, being that you all seen or have experienced, coming in or coming out of the pandemic, and even being in the pandemic, what are some of the needs that you've seen in your communities or in the communities the most that you can kind of point out across the board? Right.
Well, one of the first things that comes to mind for me is consistency and stability for the kids in the communities. There was a ton of fluctuation over the last few years as we were all living in that same boat, and I think that we were all craving those same things. And I think that when it comes to the kids in the communities that we're serving, those needs are amplified. In any program that you're in, if you don't have structure, then it becomes a lot more chaotic. If you're running into behavioral issues or things like that, a lot of times you can pin that down to the structure of your program and how consistent it is and what types of relationships that they have in there. And so we've seen a lot of really tremendous need for more social and emotional support for kids, more support in helping them to build strong bonds and relationships. It was a lot for people to come out of seclusion if they were at home and learning. And in Utah, we actually only had one school district that was closed entirely through the bulk of the pandemic. Our state was very insistent that the rest of them remained open, and even that dynamic created some some interesting divides and stigmas around the different people that were in those different areas. We did see some interesting results as we were looking at like national literacy and math tests that were happening and what was going on there, where we saw more students in Utah that were performing at a higher level than the national average. And that was kind of one of the things that we were looking at is, well, we insisted on not closing down our schools, and so we didn't see the same academic losses, but then we also had a lot of really hot zones for the virus and a lot of transmission and a lot of denial of that and everything along those lines too that caused some issues and things like that. So really we've seen a lot of that. When I think of some of our biggest needs that we're looking to address, we're looking at the staff in the programs. We're looking at what the workforce is like right now within our programs and a lot of the struggles that we see there. And those all feed into the things that we're seeing with kids. Like I said, what we see in the kids is mirrored by what we see in the adults in our programs. And we're dealing with all the same struggles that those kids are. We just have a lot more responsibility in how we're supposed to handle things, given the trauma that we've endured or the feelings that we're having about things and everything along those lines. So we're still having those same thoughts and feelings and anxieties, but at higher stakes. And we're also helping guide kids through this process of understanding these new feelings and trying to reacclimate to society while we're also trying to do that ourselves. And so it's really difficult to try to mirror that for someone or to model that for someone when you're still trying to figure out exactly how to put one foot in front of the other, you know?
Yeah, the staffing is definitely one of the biggest challenges I think the after-school field nationally is experiencing, as I'm sure all of you in this audience here are seeing that in your programs on a daily basis. I mean, everybody is struggling to hire, but it seems to be a bigger challenge within the after-school realm, trying to find people who are interested coming into work into these programs. And so you're starting to see some interesting ideas, interesting innovations emerge as to, okay, how do we get people in? Do we try and lean a little bit more heavily on national service, see if America can be more of a source than perhaps it has been in bringing in staff? Do we look at apprenticeship programs and actually start tapping into our high school youth, giving them opportunities? There's a couple of sessions that are at least a session here, and I've seen a couple of programs across the country where they're setting up apprenticeship programs where the after-school program is working with schools or a school district to say, okay, if you've got high school students that are interested in education, after school is a great way to expose them to the field. It gives us some additional staff. We can work on training them. Perhaps they can earn credit for participating in those opportunities and be able to help support our programs that are desperately in need, and give them a paycheck too. Give these students a paycheck as well, pay them for the time that they're dedicating. So we're seeing some examples of that pop up, but that is in most of the recent surveys that the Afterschool Alliance has put out, staffing comes back as one of the primary issues that programs are concerned about. Mental health, social emotional learning, all of those aspects as well. The other thing is program sustainability. There's been a huge investment, at least from the federal level, and in many states as well, over the course of the last couple of years because of concerns about learning loss. How do we get children and youth back up to standards in the wake of the pandemic? There's been a lot of money that's been pumped into education, and quite a bit of that money has come down through the American Rescue Plan to after-school programs. Not every program has seen this, not every community has seen these funds come in, but many have. And programs are utilizing those dollars, but they're not going to last forever. So now there becomes a concern about how do we make sure that our program stays sustainable? Where do we go out and find funding? And there are several states that are looking at trying to create some kind of funding stream to try and help support after school, such as what California has long had here. There's a couple across the country that are looking into those opportunities, but also on local levels, trying to find new partnerships and build out new ways and new ideas within communities to bring in additional support. Because one of the things the pandemic did, a silver lining to it, is really highlight the vital need of these programs and the vital work that you all do on a daily basis to support children and youth in your communities. People recognize that. We're seeing that in surveys that we have put out. We did some polling after the last election, and it's unanimous, it's bipartisan, that people really do see that these programs are important. So how do we continue to support them because they do fulfill a need in their community?
Have you seen anyone put some things in place? And I know it's still a little early, being that some of us, this is our first year completely back into schools and after-school programs. But have you seen anything put in place that has kind of been successful or looks promising?
The things that I've seen have really come down to benefits for the staff that are in the programs. I think that there's a lot to be said for looking at younger groups, looking at these becoming opportunities for high school students that are entering the workforce. But we also, that's not largely the group that is driven after school programming. It's typically people in, they're very young adults up through people in their mid-30s is the bulk of our workforce that is working in after-school programs. It's difficult because they're part-time, low-paying positions that we're trying to professionalize, that we're really trying to emphasize that it's a career opportunity, but there are also those limited opportunities to step up into those things. So what I've seen that has been most successful so far has been where programs are able to increase wages for their staff, find additional funds to create competitive pay for their staff so that we are not competing with Wendy's or Chick-fil-A or something like that are paying wages that are higher than a lot of the staff in after-school programs. We did a salary and retention study in this last year in Utah to look at if we could connect overall program quality to staff retention and how much staff we're making. And I don't think it'd be any surprise to anybody that, number one, we saw that in the state of Utah, the average staff pay was about $13 an hour. In Utah right now, if you work at Chick-fil-A, you can make $18 an hour. So that's really hard to contend with, that type of thing. And so we also were able to discover that the more highly you can compensate someone, the more likely they are to stick around and be retained in that program. The longer that you have employees in your program, the higher quality the program is because they're able to take the time to implement those high quality practices and things along those lines. And so for us, it comes down to being able to meet that compensation. I think that something I think is important to point out about this is none of these are new issues. After school programs have always had high turnover. Staff pay has always been an issue. The low hours have always been an issue. If you've ever hired for an after-school program, it's difficult to find something that's not a morning shift, not a swing shift, not an evening shift. We're right in the middle of all that and just in the right spot that you can't work another job as well unless it's really early or it's really late or something like that. And so there are all these roadblocks that come into that. So what I've been asking, what are other benefits that we look at? We look at the benefits of the youth that we serve in programs, but honestly, these programs don't just serve the youth that are in these programs. A lot of the staff that are working in these programs are also, we just acknowledge the fact that they're low-paying positions. They're in the low-income demographic. I once took a group of my staff when I was working with Boys and Girls Clubs over to a shelter with youth that we served, and they talked about the poverty rate, and it was above what all of my staff made. And we're there at a shelter where people don't have homes, and my staff all look at me and I'm I'm in the same boat as you guys are. The opportunity is just not there. And so we have a value proposition that I think that we're able to offer where we've demonstrated over the last couple of years when schools shut down, when child care centers shut down, when everything was closed down and we had frontline workers that had to be in. I know in Utah it was after school programs that had the flexibility to remain open, to extend their hours, to get more computers so kids could do their at-home learning at an after school program if they needed to. So we were really able to demonstrate we were the grease and the cogs of society. We kept the wheels turning for a lot of people. And so I think that's something that we all have to be really cognizant of, and we can't forget that we help to drive society. You guys help to drive society for a while. You do every day, but it was really apparent for a strong moment there. And so that's something that I think we really have to emphasize as we're bringing up these conversations about staff wages and how to compensate people. I think there's an assumption that after-school workers, that it is this it's a summer thing. It's just you're a camp counselor. You just show up, But there's so much more to it than that, and we are so much more essential. We're essential workers. We hold up a lot of society in the work that we do, and in just empowering and enabling parents to work with the peace of mind that their kids are safe. not to mention all of the many, many benefits we offer to kids. So I think we also have to look at the other benefits for the staff that are in the programs. We can look at volunteerism, and we know that there are certain benefits that people that volunteer a certain number of hours every week or every month, that they're reaping from that. Like they feel better about themselves. They feel like they're contributing to society. All those benefits are there for people that are working in the after-school field as well. So we have to better dial in on that. If we're working with kids on developing coping mechanisms, that means the staff are going through those same things as well. So how can we better capitalize on those other things that staff have to gain from working in these programs as well, while we're also pushing for them to get a higher wage. But there's a lot that can be gained in the field, and I think we really have to try to amplify that as well.
Yes, I mean, raising wages and improving benefits has definitely been one of the key things that has helped retain staff or attract staff to programs in many cases. And I don't know that I have much more to add to that. I mean,
Right.
you are key to society, essential workers. I mean, we saw that. We did an in-depth look at what we were terming community learning centers during the pandemic, when after-school programs were stepping up, opening their doors, and allowing children and youth to have that safe space to come in, to be able to do their online learning in a place where they had adults that could support them while their parents had to work, because their parents were essential. And so after school has been, I think, recognized as a key cog in society. And as we continue to try and really put the attention on our programs to help that with sustainability and help advocate for them, being able to talk about that, I think, is really important.
Right, and you've all said a good portion of things that we're going to tap into a little bit more as we continue to have this conversation, especially when we talk about funding and how that increased during the pandemic, and also getting the result of, what that funding has been able to do for out-of-school time programming and staff, how professional development has done well, and all those other things. But I do want to shed some light on some other resources or some other needs that they may have. So outside of staffing, what else or what other needs have you seen in communities that they truly need, especially when it comes to resources? Because that's another thing that kind of took a heavy hit during the pandemic as well.
Right. Well, I think some of the things that I'd mentioned before, I mean, we've seen increased behavioral issues. I think that we see that echoed in after school and during the school day. Kids that are struggling with more self-regulation, kids that have some stunted emotional development because if they stayed home for a year or two and weren't interacting socially, then those were some struggles that they had to overcome and deal with as well. We've also seen some things that many families are struggling with, as we've seen the cost of things go up, wages have remained stagnant, parents aren't able to afford as much care. So we've also seen a reduction in the number of kids that are enrolled in programs because we have more older siblings that are staying home to take care of younger siblings because parents can't afford licensed childcare for their kids or something like that. So you have two kids that are at home alone that are essentially latchkey kids that aren't reaping the benefits of these programs or of that licensed childcare and the environment that has to offer them and things like that. So I think that there are a lot of struggles. I think that after school is also reflective of society at large. If we're seeing people struggling with housing, with affordable housing, then that's something that we see in our programs. I think that there are many more programs that are serving youth that do not have homes, that receive their meals from those programs. I know when I ran that Boys and Girls Club program, a lot of the kids that we had that were at that shelter, they got breakfast and lunch from school and they got dinner from us. So they got 3 square meals a day from their school or their after school program because there wasn't other food that was out there. And I know that that's something that is weighing very heavily on a lot of families right now as well. And so after school programs, kind of like what we talk about with what happens with school day teachers, where they're teachers and social workers and counselors and doing all these other things. I think that we're seeing that same kind of compound happening for after-school providers as well, where you're a jack of all trades and you're wearing many, many, many hats. We wear a lot of hats in the after-school field as well, but I think a lot more of those hats are supporting the emotional and mental well-being of kids that we serve, more so than we had to before.
Yeah, I mean, and it's experiencing burnout. I mean, we've all been through probably some of the most difficult circumstances as a society that our country and our world has been through in quite some time. And as after-school program professionals, we're providing, not only having to take care of ourselves, but taking care of our children and youth. We do this because we care, and we care about their emotional support. So it's trying to make sure that there is something that, whether it's making sure that there's time or the ability to access counseling or some kind of support for our workforce as well, because we all need to just decharge and understand what we've just gone through and be able to continue to support our children and youth. I'm going to say it again because it's always the thing that is a challenge, but it is the funding piece is another huge resource. I'm just looking at some numbers that we had in our latest COVID survey that we did a couple months ago, and I asked if, has your cost per child increased, and 52% of the respondents said yes, it has. Very few people said it decreased. I mean, we see it when we go to the grocery store, the inflation costs, and it's staffing, inflation, the cost of supplies, the cost of food, the cost of transportation. The respondents to the survey said all of those things are putting pressure on the cost it is for them to serve children. And the concern with that is, well, if all of these costs are going up and our funding doesn't really, or our funding starts to drop because the additional money that's gone into it goes away, well, then we start serving fewer students. And so it's trying to find, okay, where can we find those new partnerships? Where do we find those new funds to be able to come in?
Right. And with those issues or those challenges being presented, have you seen anyone kind of tackle them in a fundamental way to where it could be like, oh, this is something different? Like you said, looking into our youth for hiring, giving them an opportunity to kind of learn a little bit more about the field, but also provide them with a paycheck for their time. So this is something that they can actually make up in their mind if this was something that they want to really go into. Why? Because they've had that experience. And it's also given to them as, like you said, college credit. Going into them, getting a little bit more experience, not just life experience, but also school and academic experience at the same time. So have y'all seen any innovations to kind of tackle any of these issues that we brought up?
I think for me, it's really been about the how we look at employing people, how we look at what the field looks like, taking a look at other things that were kind of off our radar before. I was in the session I was in earlier today was talking about, we talk about trauma-informed care for youth, but this session was focusing on utilizing trauma-informed care for staff, and talked a lot about the fact that as after-school staff or educators, we inherit a lot of secondary trauma. And so we are on the front lines working with these kids, and we are seeing everything that the kids are going through, and we're experiencing that along with them, and we're internalizing that, and then their trauma turns into our trauma, or we also have our own trauma already that comes to the table. So you've got like this excess of all of these other bottled up experiences and feelings that are really difficult to work with. So how can we deal with that in the field? What type of work environment can we create where we're acknowledging those things, talking about those things, giving people an opportunity to work through some stuff that's really supportive of them and the things that they're experiencing? Are we creating channels for outlets for them where they can talk about things, or that they know that they're in a safe space to address these concerns, not just pertaining to our kids, but to ourselves and everything that we hear from them? That's something that I think a lot of times we kind of gloss over because we talk about all the amazing benefits that happen for kids in our programs, but we also don't, I think because we spend so much time really talking about like the glossy and shiny parts of after school, we don't really talk about the parts that are really difficult about it. If you're working with youth that are really struggling with something, or you see in really terrible circumstances, that's a weight that we all carry, that we don't often acknowledge. And if you look at any ad for an after-school position or any poster that after-school staff are, that they're like the beacon of light in that picture for those kids. It takes a lot to shine that bright when you're dealing with so much darkness, right? And so I think that that's a piece of it, is acknowledging that, having that be a part of how we take our approach to after school, giving staff the tools to be able to acknowledge those things and work through those things, even with the kids that they're working with in their programs, making sure it's okay for us to be vulnerable and to learn as adults as well.
And I think some of it has also come down to trying to find those critical community partnerships too that can help provide those additional supports. So in some communities, I've heard of programs that have leveraged the hospital or the local hospital or some kind of local health provider that can be able to help provide some of those mental health or behavioral health supports for the staff, but also to link that back to the families as well that need that. Because that's critical too, making sure that these children and their families are able to have access to that as well. So trying to figure out who in the community can help with this, because the after school program tries to do it all, but needs to bring in those partners and to be able to link people with what they need.
Right. So you've all talked about money. Cut us a bigger check, in other words. Thank you so much. By nods, I see we all agree. We are all in agreement, yes. So in talking about money and finance and funding for out-of-school time programming, we've seen a great increase in what we've usually gotten in the past. So comparing what we've gotten before to what we've gotten to help us get through this pandemic, what are some of the changes that you've seen in programming that's helpful for the field, and what do you hope stays?
Well, so a number of programs that have received funding through the ARP dollars or other funding streams that come through, they've been utilizing that to pay their staff more, to be able to go out and try and provide those greater benefits and recruit people to bring them in. They've also been able to look at the various partners that are in their community or various vendors that they can work with to bring in different kinds of programming to engage their students, refresh their programs, bring in some new ideas to try and help make sure that their children and youth that are participating are staying engaged.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've seen those same types of innovations. It's been difficult because the funding that's come out has also been limited. It's not sustainable funding, and so that's something that we've really been trying to emphasize to people as well. Is it's great that we have ESSER 3 and American Rescue Plan funds that are coming into programs, but also you can look at that as a provider and know that those are funds that are going to go away after 2024. And so you can only invest so much into your staff if it's really difficult because you want to create additional access, you want to be able to compensate your staff at a higher wage, but if you're not able to close that funding gap as that money starts to go away, then you're faced with the possibility of having to lay people off or to more limit your ratio of your program again or things along those lines. And so we're trying to really make people understand. And I know in Utah, when we've talked about this during our legislature, we talked to policymakers. They're like, oh, you guys got all that money. We heard about it. You guys are good for a while. And we're like, we're good for like right this moment, but also like just because your fridge is full once doesn't mean you never go grocery shopping again, right? Mm-hmm. You have to keep putting more food in there, otherwise you run out of food and then you don't have anything to eat. And so we've been trying to emphasize that like this is nice, but we need this to continue coming. And also we still have, like in Utah, we still have 1 in 8 kids that has access to a program that would utilize one if they could. And so there's still a huge gap when we have this influx of funding. And that gap was there before, and the gap is there right now. And so there are still a lot of issues that we're faced with that, where we had this influx of funding that came in. We were able to see some increases for staff, but not statewide. It hasn't been equitable throughout the entire state. I'd say as far as like advocating for how these funds are spent, it needs to be spent more equally throughout an entire state. In Utah, as we look at it, we have, our State Board of Education was able to grant American Rescue Plan funds out to programs to fund after school and summer programming, which was amazing. But then there's also another allocation of that ARP funding that comes to your state. Mm-hmm. And those are funds that your municipality can determine how it's spent, or individual school districts can determine how that's spent. And we only have one school district in Utah that has utilized those ARP funds for after school or summer programming. And so there are still some gaps there, and it's not closing all those things. We've seen programs that have received it have invested in some infrastructure stuff because they knew that they couldn't increase the number of staff that they had there. So they're like, cool, let's fix up these 2 vans that have been broken down for a while, or let's take care of these other needs. So they're still increasing their capacity. They're still making strong investments in their program, but it's not sustained. It's not ongoing enough to meet the need that we have for programs in our communities.
Right. I mean, some programs were also able to increase the number of students served, but again, you're looking at when the funding disappears.
For so long.
how are we going to be able to continue to keep serving those students? Or do we have to try and find ways of cutting things elsewhere? So it is a challenge. Some states have been better at distributing these funds than others. Some school districts take a look at this and say, great, this is fantastic, we're going to do high impact tutoring and that's it, and completely leave after school out of the equation. Other communities are like, we can put this into creating a really exciting and holistic summer learning program and bring in partners, bring in others from the community, bring in the after school community to be able to serve these programs. So it's been it's a very wide range across the country. It is something that we at the Alliance have been tracking and have on our website a map that includes success stories to try and highlight, where the money has been going, and it's all over the place depending on the community that you're in.
Right.
So have you all seen any specific programs that you want to highlight that you feel have done, like, this is new, this is great, but this is also in some ways it may be sustainable if you keep the way it is or tweak it a little bit? So that moment of highlighting and celebrating. Have you seen any programs do anything close to that nature?
I mean, this is not so much innovative as it is impactful, but we saw one of our municipally run programs was able to drastically increase their staff salaries. And that was the first one in the state that was like, okay, this is what's average for the state. $13 is average. We're going to bring it to the $16 to $18 range. And so once they did that, then other programs were able to start leveraging that and saying, look, we're going to lose all of our people to this other organization because they're still struggling to hire people when they're paying them at this higher rate, but we're paying lower than that. So we at least have to match what they're paying. And so once that one program was able to increase those wages, we saw like a domino effect around the state of other programs starting to pick up on that. And then it got to the point that city-run program again increased their wages by another $2 because then it got leveled throughout the field. So that's how they were able to remain competitive. And so that's something that's really good there. A couple other things that we have seen that have been good and innovative as we continue to talk about staffing struggles is we've got some strong regional networks around Utah. And this is a group of providers in one specific region that are collaborating on things. So in Salt Lake County, we have 20 different organizations. This is their opportunity to come together and collaborate and share notes and share trainings and things like that. We had two organizations, one that struggled to staff during the school year and one that struggled to staff during the summer. And so they partnered up and said, okay, cool. When we close for the school year, we're going to send all of our staff to you guys to work during the summer. And then when we get back to the school year, they can stay here if they want, but they're encouraged to go back to your program. So their staff are retained, they're consistent in their training, they're still working around the year. A lot of them can be seasonal positions, and that helped to close that gap. And they were able to retain a lot more employees by giving them that year-round opportunity to continue to work as well. And so we'd love to see more collaborative opportunities like that as well.
This is not so much an innovative idea, but I think it was a really good example, and I'm hoping I'm remembering this correctly. But I ran across a program recently, a school district in Connecticut, where they were able to receive ARP money through the state, and they decided, we're going to start a summer learning program. We haven't had one in 10 years. And so we're going to do this, we're going to create this, it's going to be fun for the kids. The superintendent got really involved and excited about this, agreed to teach one of the classes. He's doing some writing thing. And he tried to encourage other teachers, and other teachers are like, yeah, sure, we'll get involved in this. We're going to teach what we want to teach, what's fun and exciting for us, and get our kids interested in this. And so that, that summer we're going to be offering field trips. We're going to be allowing students to pick and choose kind of the courses that they're interested in taking so that the youth have some voice in that as well. So not necessarily innovative, but it was just that there was an enthusiasm in the community. And not off the top of my head, I can't remember any specific examples, but I do know that there are some programs out there that are thinking along those lines and trying to find ways of how can we create something that's engaging.
Right. I lost my train of thought, y'all. So going back to, and what it sounds like is a lot of collaboration taking place in this process. Mm-hmm. So going back into the communities and seeing if they can help with the school needs or with the program needs, and see if how they could come in and be an aid, in whichever capacity that they can. So with the collaboration that's taking place and that's happening, what do you hope to see moving forward in the future? Let's say that we don't get the big spending money that we have been getting. So
Right.
how do we begin to make this relationships obtainable to where it could continue to go like further down the road? And it doesn't have to be well, I guess we stop here. We tried.
Right. Well, I think a lot of it does come down to those opportunities for collaboration. And basically, something that's great about after school is we've got the biggest table, we've got the biggest umbrella. There's room for everybody under our umbrella. And so we have a lot of opportunities for connections to other fields and other industries. And so basically, if we're looking for, that amazing funding opportunity, it would be great if we're to come from the federal government and they're like, Secretary of Education is correct. Every kid needs access to this. We've created the infrastructure. Every after-school program is free for everybody. That would be wonderful. I won't shoot that idea down. But if that doesn't happen, I think what we have to do is look at where we can spread our influence, look at where we can build additional relationships, and think about all the things that we touch on in after school, and think about where we can make connections to others in those other areas. So if we're looking at like mental health, we do a lot to support mental health, mental well-being for kids in these programs. And so who can we connect to in our communities that is doing that work, and how can we build up more collaborations with them? If there are services for people in poverty or homeless, what are they doing? We're serving those same kids as well. So let's build some bridges with them. If there are people in the medical industry, if there are people that are doing anything, let's build relationships for them. And so that's my strategy in Utah is we work with our Office of Child Care, we work with our Department of Workforce Services, we work with our Board of Education, we work with our Departments of Health and Human Services, because they all have widespread influence and impacts all throughout our state. And if they see the impacts that we have, then we're more likely to get more pockets of support from them in a number of different ways. What I would love is like during our legislative session, when we have an after-school bill that goes up, to have someone from each of these sectors getting up and being like, oh yeah, we love after school because they also do this. Oh yeah, we also love after school because they do this thing. Because I think there are a lot of assumptions about what happens in after school, and really after school is so much bigger and so much more vast than any assumption that anyone can make about everything that's happening in those programs. And so I think that we need to spell that out, that we're not only invaluable and indispensable in this one way, but we're indispensable in 50 other ways too.
We employ a similar strategy on the national level. I mean, we're not just talking to the Department of Education. We have partners at the Department of Labor. We have partners all across the government in which we're trying to find ways to fit in after school. We talk to the early child care community because they're also doing school-aged care, and that overlaps with after school. So being able to identify and think a little bit outside the box of who it is that we might be able to work with. We'll say one of the hot topics that seems that, at least from our perspective, we've been hearing a lot about in after school is workforce readiness, career tech, career readiness, college readiness, and exploration. And that, I think, is an area of opportunity to really try and tap into, as Ben was saying, into some of these more unique partnerships and bring those people in. Even if the funding goes away, if you have the ability to set up a program, particularly with, if you're working with high school and middle school youth, where they can go in and go explore a career, do an internship, an externship, an apprenticeship, and be able to work with some partner who is going to take those youth under their wing to be able to bring them into that. And then there's some programming that you're doing back in your program, and you've got that business or that company helping to support the work that you're doing. That could be another potential area of growth for after school, and a way to try and bring in some additional partners that you may not have necessarily thought to work with to begin with, and help build out programming opportunities. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be an easy solution to any of this, and it will be interesting to see how what ideas start to bubble up from the field, as well as we figure out how to navigate moving forward.
Right. My close to last question for you is, being that we've brought up all of these things and kind of rehashed this, coming out of the pandemic, some of what our needs may be, and all these other things, especially not just when it comes to funding, but our community needs and our student needs. How do we as professionals begin to advocate for those needs, not just on a local level, but also on a state and national level? Like you said, getting in touch with legislation, let them know, like, hey, so you are in these seats, doing these things. How can we get the assistance that we need? How do we go about having those conversations?
Well, you could host a Lights On After School event. do something this October to bring in your local community members, your mayors, your elected officials. You invite your member of Congress to come in and see what it is that you do and why these programs are so vitally critical. Contact your member of Congress, contact your governor, contact your state legislatures. Make sure that they are hearing from you, and they're hearing from you constantly, because you are all the experts. You can go out and talk about what it is that your program does, why you need these extra funds, how this is going to be spent, and that, after school has played such a critical role during the pandemic. It continues to play a critical role as we go through this recovery period, or whatever the new normal is that we're in now. And that, these programs are vital and they're needed, and they're not going to go away, and the need is only going to continue to increase. So being able to take videos, post on social media, have meetings with local leaders showcasing the work that you do. You are all the experts. You can tell the story even better than I can sitting in Washington, D.C., that's for sure, because I rely on hearing from you and what it is that you're doing to be able to go be your voice there. Just make sure that you're going out and talking to people and really telling the story of what after school is.
Yeah, getting policymakers into your programs, I think, is one of the most impactful things that you can do. We had a bill supporting after school a few years ago that was able to get passed, and we actually had a representative in Utah who had been pretty staunchly. It's astonishing to even say, but we do have some folks that are not supportive of after school programming. We had someone who was staunchly not really in our corner, and he went and helped them serve Kids Cafe in one of their after school programs for one afternoon, and that turned him around. He testified on our behalf when that bill was up, because he spent an afternoon in that program seeing what really happened there, and it was a really eye-opening experience for him, exactly what was happening, who was in need there. Like I said, there are a lot of assumptions that are made about what after school is, who's benefiting from it, how badly people actually need after school, and things like that. So I think that, it's this thing that can be kind of taken for granted, where it's like, oh yeah, it's after school, it's there, it's consistent, it's cool, but I think that we have to really help them to see how diverse and powerful and engaging and empowering everything that happens during after school is, and that it's meaningful to their communities. I think something else is continuing to demonstrate the need for these programs. So it's not just us advocating for our programs. Parents carry a lot of weight as we see things happen. We've seen a few fringe parent groups nationally make a lot of big moves in being really loud about things. It's not a majority of parents that have issues with books that are on library shelves, but we've all heard something now about what is happening with books on library shelves. If we were able to get a fraction of the parents in our camp talking about how desperately they need after-school programs, as there are parents that are vocal about books they're concerned about being on bookshelves, that would be a really powerful outlet for us to get our messaging out, that we need these programs, that our kids need these programs. If we were to get employers to talk about the fact that it's my employees work better knowing that their kids are someplace safe. They're able to be more committed and more productive in the workplace. That says a lot when you have people that are generating economic movement in a community, saying this is something that we need and able to remain solvent in this community, to be able to support our employees. We need this type of infrastructure here. So think about who can advocate for your programs. Think about who should be in your program, and show them what's going on. You've got something cool happening, I know it, so show them.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
Also, youth voice. Make sure you get your youth out talking about the programs. They're clearly the most important stakeholders in this entire process, because they're the ones that benefit from these programs. They also have a lot to say. And they are, in some cases, your best advocates to bring on meetings, to show somebody around your after-school program. It gives them great leadership experience, but it also gets to really allow them to have those personal conversations about why they love coming to your after-school program, and why they continue to come every single day when they could potentially be doing something else.
Right. So at this point in time, we're going to go ahead and open up the floor to all of you. And if you have any questions at this time that you want to ask our guests based on the information that they're shared, you want to know a little bit more about, the floor is open to you all. So is there anyone that wants to ask a question? Yes. Go ahead. Give us your name and your organization that you're with.
Jen Rodriguez. We're Carlsbad Educational Foundation. We run after-school programs for elementary students. You guys mentioned how your experience is that staff are looking for more hours like that and are really motivated by like working all year round. So what our struggle is over here is that we are open all year round, and we don't have staff that want to work all year round. That they're like, yeah, I'm just gonna take 6 weeks off in summer, even though we're running a summer program. I'm gonna take all of winter break off. So like we've done things like higher pay, more hours, full-time positions, you know, things like that. But I think in our area, it's not as motivating. So we're trying to come up with other ideas to keep staff to say like, hey, I want to work 365 days a year, and I love your program. We do so many things, you know what I mean?
Right. I think it's hard to find that balance because that flexibility is one of the things that makes the after-school workforce attractive to people, is knowing that like this might be a seasonal opportunity, or this might be something I could think of like a dozen different staff from all the time I was running programs who worked for me and then took a break and did something else and then came and worked for me again and then did that like maybe 3 times or something like that. I could think of one employee who worked for me like 4 separate instances across 2 different organizations, you know? And so that's one of the tough things that we have to deal with there. So I would say even in those instances, like as much as you can talk to the people about what their motivation is, what they're in for, what type of commitment you can get from them, the stronger their drive will be to stick around there. When I ran programs, I would always try to talk to my staff about like their personal goals and objectives outside of what they're doing in the program, so that we could think about like, okay, cool, this is what you're pursuing in school, or this is what you're working on personally. These are your overall goals. This is how working in this program can help you to advance that and to move farther along in your life's goals or your personal process or whatever. And I feel like I've always gotten more buy-in from that, because then it's not just about the impacts they're having on the kids, but then it's also about their own personal gains and seeing that this overall work fits into their larger scheme and life plan and everything like that. Then they're more willing to understand, like, if I stick this out for an entire year, then X, Y, or Z will come out of it. But it still isn't perfect for as many staff as I feel like I was able to retain by being able to have those conversations. There was always like one like revolving door position where like I've got 3 solid people and one person who's gone. Like I'm always filling that one position. It's never really full, you know? And so and like I said, it's tough too, because these aren't new problems. It just felt like, I feel like it just happened all at once for once, instead of being like, cool, we just are always rotating through people. I know for my own organization, it was like in a 4-month span, like all but 4 of my 12-person team left, you know, and so I know that a lot of people were experiencing that same exact thing, you know, but I can also speak, hopefully others have had a similar experience where once we staffed that up, we had another really good, solid, committed group that's able to keep things moving forward, aside from that one revolving door position that we're still always filling all the time, you know? So make those personal connections. It helps with everything that you're doing running your program, as far as mission buy-in, ownership of the program, understanding the objectives, connecting your program objectives with their personal objectives. It helps you all the way around. And the more ownership they have, the more likely they are to stick around.
I don't know that I have anything else to add to that wonderful response from Ben.
Just wanted to check, make sure everybody had a conversation. Is there any other questions? Yes, no.
If you want to talk more about staff retention, my session tomorrow afternoon with Ken Anthony from Connecticut is the secret sauce, and it's all about employee hiring and retention and stuff like that too. It's at 2:45, I think, maybe. Look at your schedule. It knows better than I do.
Awesome. So I didn't see any hands, so since that we don't have any more questions, I'll go ahead and start wrapping us up. So for the end of our wrap-up, we usually do a professionals lounge. Our professionals lounge is usually a reflective portion of our show. So I'll have a question for the guests that'll have them dig a little bit back deeper in their mind. And sometimes it's a sense of, if you were able to talk or ask your younger self, or say anything to your younger self about being in this field of work, what would you say? So we're going to go ahead and tackle that one. So my question for you for Professionals Lounge is, what best advice would you give to everyone in the audience, or anyone that's interested in out-of-school time programming? What is the best advice that you would share with them to help them not just grow as individuals, but grow in this profession?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is that it's an opportunity to follow your passion. It's an opportunity to not just expose kids to these amazing ideas, but to expose them to the things that you care the most about. That's something I absolutely loved about being in programs, was like, cool, I like to drum, and now we drum with the kids. I like to paint, now we paint with the kids. And so that, I feel it's easy to try to do the thing that you think the kids will think is cool, but what they'll be most into is seeing the passion that you have. And I think that we all have something that we all care a lot about, that some person in our life exposed us to. And it was their passion of that thing that made you go like, what is that thing that they care so much about? Maybe I'd be into this too. And then sharing that thing. So share something you care about, and that will carry you a long way. Be earnest in it and be a big nerd about it, and they'll love it.
Ben, you stole what I was going to say.
Sorry. I could say another one too.
But another thing is, one other piece of advice I would say is make time for yourself too, because we are also passionate about this work. We pour our entire selves into this because we care about the children and youth that we serve on a daily basis. Make sure that you're also taking time to care for yourself as well, so that you can be there working with kids every single day and continue to keep up that energy and feeling as if this is something that does give you joy. Just make sure that you're taking that time for your own self-care as well. Don't want to overlook that.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna give a round of applause for that. That is so true, because we
Thank you.
give so much, and so much we don't always pour back into ourselves the way that we should. So, and I'm taking a sip of that cup because I definitely need to do that myself. So, wrapping it up, I want to say thank you to you all, and thank you, audience, for being here. Go ahead and connect with us online. Go ahead and like and share this out. This will be posted next week. So if you didn't get a chance to fully get a full listen to this conversation, it'll be replayed for you on Instagram through my account, and I'll also share this out with Boost as well. They'll also have a copy of it, and they'll give their further instructions on it. But that is it for now. Thank you for joining us, and I hope to see and talk to you soon. Y'all have a great day, and bye-bye. If you enjoyed this episode and feel you received some good information, give us a review on Apple Podcasts or visit the Podchaser website and leave us a comment. This will help us get feedback on the show and collect testimonials for our personal website. Share us with your friends, share us with your family, share us with your network. Help us spread the word about how out-of-school time programming is impacting our youth as well as our communities. We can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Podcast Addict. Well, that's all I have for today. In the words of Mr. Arthur Ashe, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Until next time, bye-bye.